Hey everybody, it's Kathy. Welcome to episode 26 of Mondays on the Mat. I'm coming to you live from my office/yoga room. And today's question comes from Kelsey, who wants to know more about Upavistha Konasana, or a seated wide angle pose where then you fold forward between your legs, or ideally you fold forward in between your legs. But her question came up because she's feeling stuck, like she can't really go anywhere in the pose. So as we get into today's topic, please remember, if you've got any questions or comments, put them right down here in the comment bar so that I can address you as we go through today's episode. Or if you think of something later, even then, put it down there and I'll check back and make sure to answer any questions or give you any clarification about today's yoga pose that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to have a quick anatomy lesson so that you understand the components that are going into the posture. I'll show you then down on my mat what it looks like, or when you have restriction, what that looks like, and things that you can do to potentially create some progress in the posture. And then I might even give you a couple of nuggets of yoga wisdom along the way to soothe your mind around feeling like your posture needs to look a certain way. Okay, so let's get into talking about the hip joint itself for a moment. So I have my friend, my skeleton here, and I just want to quickly note, I'm getting reflection. There we go. So when we talk about the hips, which is what we're going to be talking a little bit about today, and the movement of the hips, we're talking about this joint here where the head of the femur inserts into the pelvis. Okay, and that joint right there, what's so interesting about it is that it can move in 6 directions. So when you're standing and your leg comes forward towards the front body, that's called flexion. If you move your leg back away from or towards the back of your body, that's extension. If you move your leg out to the side, it's called abduction with a B, like boy. You move your leg into center or across center line, that's adduction with a D, adduction. And then in the socket itself, your femur can turn, and if it turns out to the side, that's external rotation. And if it turns in towards the middle, that's internal rotation. So it's sometimes we move the hip joint in only one of those directions, and sometimes it's a combination of 2 or even 3 of them. So for Upavistha Konasana, while we're sitting in a wide straddle, there is both flexion, because the legs come forward at the hip joint, and abduction, they're moving out to the sides. I've also read in some books that there's external rotation, but I'm going to disagree with that personally, and if you want to get into it a little bit more, we can. But I feel like if you externally rotate your legs while you're sitting in Upavistha Konasana, then your knees and your toes are going to start to point back behind you. And ideally in the posture, you want your knees and toes pointed straight up towards the ceiling, so that the belly of the back of your thighs and calves are rooted and pressing firmly into the ground. So then the question is, if you're feeling stuck, where is the restriction happening? And I have a couple cool pictures I want to show you as we move into this today. So this guy's pretty cool because it's a skeleton and it's showing the muscles of the inner thighs. Those are the adductor muscles on the inner thighs. They move the legs together. And so if you're sitting in your straddle and you feel like your legs won't go wide apart, you could be experiencing tightness in those muscles, or, while the picture doesn't show it, where the muscle connects to the bone in the hip socket, there's a big ligament. And for some people, that ligament is a little bit tighter, and therefore also the ligament can restrict your ability to open the legs wide apart from each other. So that's one type of restriction. I have another fabulous picture I'm going to show you, which is a little bit more detailed, which I love. So here's the person sitting in the straddle, and you can see this muscle here is part of the hamstring group. So the back of your thigh and coming up into the hips. So if going forward is feeling restricted, there is potentially tightness in the hamstrings, parts of the hips, and while neither of the two pictures I have show it, could also potentially be tightness in the low back. So it's like, okay, what do we do if we're tight? I'm going to come down on the floor and show you a couple of options in the pose of what you can do to help alleviate some of that stuckness. I just spit on myself. That was kind of gross. Sorry. So some things you can do in the pose to help you alleviate some of that tightness. A couple of suggestions of other things you can do. And then again, a little dollop of wisdom, of a reminder how to keep your mind calm about this whole situation. So here we go. Let's go down towards the floor and the mat. I'm sitting on a block and I felt kind of like I couldn't get up for a second. There we go. Okay, so as I was saying, just real quick reminder, so here's flexion at the hips, and then this is abduction when the legs come apart. And if you feel like your legs don't go very far apart, there is potential tightness through your adductor muscle group, which is the inner thighs. There's potential tightness of the ligament that attaches bone to bone and muscle to bone. Ligament is bone to bone. So that could also be restricting you here. And so whenever you're stretching, guys, you want to make sure that you're feeling stretching sensation in the belly of your muscles, not way up high in the joint, because potentially in the joint, what you would end up doing is overstretching ligaments and tendons, which, unlike muscles, which are sort of elastic, they are one way only. And once you overstretch a tendon or a ligament, the potential of it coming back together is lessened, and you can end up with a chronically overstretched tendon or ligament and pain, and just don't do it. Okay? So if there is that tightness in the belly of the adductor muscles, you want to do poses that would help to lengthen those, such as lying on your back with the leg up in the air. And then I lost my face, opening the leg out to the side. Really great, easy, mild lengthener for the inner thighs. There are some other poses that do that as well, but I think that's a really great sort of mild and accessible for all people posture. So now the other piece of the pie, oh, I got my love in the way. Let's move you, love. Love's going up here. If the restriction is in the hamstring, the back of the thigh, some of the hip muscles, or the low back, when you sit in straddle, your pelvis is going to get rolled back behind you, and so you have a round low back and a collapsed chest. And this is where there's a couple of things you can do. One, which we talk about often in class, is to get a folded blanket and bring your hips up on the folded blanket so that you can start to rotate your pelvis right up over the edge of the blanket to get length in the spine. So it's really important when we forward fold that you go with a long spine rather than here, because then you're just going to get all kinds of weird stuff happening in your back. Okay? So whether you're sitting on the blanket or not, what you have to do is start to feel inside your body. Is the restriction in the hamstrings, the back of the thighs? Is the restriction in the hips? Or is the restriction in the low back? And then that way you can start to decide what other postures you can do to support this one. One thing you can do, that was very dramatic, not quite so much, is bend your knees and then feel from sitting on your sits bones as you lean forward. Does it feel tight there, there, or there? And by the way, this is a really great variation, and if it's super tiring to hold the knees up, you can roll a blanket underneath the knees on both sides and then do the posture from there with the hands forward or back as you start to elongate and lengthen into the pose. one thing that's really important to know, because Upavistha Konasana is a forward fold, is that the primary function of all forward folds is first to stretch the low back, then the upper back, and lastly the legs. So it's really important as you do that investigation to know where you're feeling that stuckness so that you can address it. If the stuckness is happening in the hamstrings, that suggestion of the blanket or bending your knees will help tremendously, as would standing poses that open up. Standing poses that open up the back of your thigh, like pyramid. I'm going to sit back up on my block. Like maybe pyramid. Or the same pose I was showing earlier, lying on your back, but with the leg just straight up into the air, which will get right into the belly of the hamstring, again, which is really accessible and doable for all body types. If it's more your hips or your low back that's tight, Malasana squat pose. Now that I move the camera, I feel like I want to show you that. So let's move again really quick. Down we go. So Malasana squat pose is really great for opening the hips and the low back. And you can do this version with your hands at your heart, or start to lean forward and place the backs of the hands on the ground, and that really starts to help stretch that area. As would child's pose or rabbit pose, which is not one I often teach in class. So let me real quick show you. Rabbit pose is where you have the toes tucked under and you're going to curl in a tight ball, reach back for your heels, and then you lift the hips up and tuck your chin to your chest, and like, oh man, I'm not even really super tight in my low back, but I feel so much goodness happening right there. So this could be another great pose to help you start to stretch out the low back up here, if the low back is the thing that's causing restriction. So those are some real basic, simple explanations. I'm going to just make sure I put more center. Some real basic explanations and real simple adjustments you can do to help make Upavistha Konasana more accessible. So now just a little dollop of yoga wisdom here at the end to soothe your mind around this pose. Right now, I think on Instagram especially, it's really popular to see pictures where people are like, this is me in 2015 and 2016 and 2017. And they're showing a really lovely progression in any particular pose. And the thing with stretching and gaining flexibility is that it absolutely takes time. And a lot of time the progress, because it's slow and it takes time, it's sort of imperceptible. Like we don't even realize we're going a little bit further and further and further in a posture until we sort of get to like what I call the ta-da moment. And so to not get super hung up on whether or not you're going any further on any particular day, but to be more just present inside your body with what's going on any given time or any time you're in that pose, so that again you can start to really notice, where am I tight, where am I restricted, where can I breathe? And this is a huge one. If you draw your breath really deliberately into the place where you're feeling that stuckness, you can start to potentially wake it up and find more spaciousness or a feeling of more openness. The other little dollop I want to throw in that I think is super important, not only for this yoga pose, but for all yoga poses, is sort of an acceptance of what the pose is giving you on any particular day, without a huge expectation that it will turn into something magically and ginormously different, because it's possible that it might never ever change due to your unique bone, muscle, soft tissue structure. And here's a really great story to help you understand that. This is something that I've noticed as a student, been a student of yoga for 21 years, and also as a teacher. I've been a teacher for 11 years now. What tends to happen when we get into a pose that's our tough pose or our stuck pose, we pop our heads up and we start looking around at all the people who apparently are doing the pose with great ease and great success while we are sucking at it or not feeling so great about it. And so we start to notice what we might describe as a deficiency. But when you're in a pose that you're super comfortable in, that doesn't happen. You're still inside your practice. You're unaware of what's going on around you. And I promise you, if you're in some super deep, groovy, stretchy pose that would look on the outside like you're doing it with great ease and effort and depth, there's another person in the room whose head has popped up and they're looking around and they're looking at you and thinking, wow, that person is so amazing and incredible and I suck. And so keep in mind, we all have postures that we're more adept at, and we all have postures that are more challenging. And even myself, I have a whole litany of postures that in the last 21 years have made little to no apparent external progress due to just the structure of some of my joints and muscles. And so when you get into your stuck posture, whether it's Upavistha Konasana or any other pose, the challenge is really less about the physical body making any more progress and more about the mind and more about the breath and more about, can you allow this thing to be the way that it is and stay with your breath and stay with your focus as much as when you're in a pose that you find more doable or more pleasurable. And that, I think, is so neat and so important, and the welcome gift of any pose that sticks us up is that it really more becomes the teacher of the mind and of presentness and of the ability to allow things to unfold the way they're unfolding without needing to manipulate or force or judge or make up stories, but to just be like breathing and feeling and present awareness of what is. So, wow, that got a little bit deep right there at the end, and I'm glad it did. That's one of my favorite things I've learned about yoga, and I think one of the favorite things I try to share with people who say, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible, or I'm not making any progress, and so I suck at yoga and I shouldn't be doing it. It's like, that's not the case. Those super special shining moments have so much more to offer you and your body and your mind than getting any deeper or being able to post one of those Instagram photo grids showing your dramatic progress through the years. So really, those are, so much good stuff right now. So that was a little bit about Upavistha Konasana, and such a great pose to learn from. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for asking this question, because it yet again shines the spotlight on what I think is one of the greatest truths about yoga, which is this: yoga is less about what it looks like on the outside and more about how it feels on the inside. And so I hope that we can all remember to stay focused on paying attention to how both yoga and life feel on the inside, and have an awesome rest of your Monday. Hey, here in California, the weather is like cuckoo super heat wave hot, and pitta, fire, energy. And so this week in class, we're going to be doing a really neat sequence that is challenging without being overheating, to help us kind of bring that pitta and any strong emotional energy that we're having a little bit more down to the ground and a little bit more manageable. So I would love to see you in group classes this week: Tuesday 6:30 to 8, Wednesday 5:30 to 7, Friday 9:30 to 11, and Saturday 9 to 10:30 a.m. Have a beautiful rest of your week. Thank you so much for this question, Kelsey. And remember, if you have any questions about a pose, philosophy, weird stuff that you think nobody else has a question about, I promise you someone else is thinking that exact same thing. So please shoot me your questions or ask me in class when I see you this week, and I will answer you on an upcoming episode of Mondays on the Mat. Have a great week, everybody. Stay cool if you're here in California, and I look forward to seeing you live next Monday. Namaste.